I'm the Deputy Executive Director of the Global Fund for Cities Development, FMDV. I'm very pleased to be your Master of Ceremonies today for this Policy Action Lab of FMDV and the Green Climate Fund on implementing the new Green Climate Fund strategy in the field of urban in Africa. I'm sorry we have a small issue with the interpretation service, so this meeting will be in English, but we can have the support of interpreters if needed for simultaneous translation. Donc je vais juste parler en français pour les francophones. Donc je suis Émilie Mayara, directrice exécutive adjointe du FMDV. On est très heureux de vous accueillir pour ce Policy Action Lab sur la nouvelle stratégie urbaine du Fonds vert pour le climat en Afrique. Nous avons actuellement un petit souci d'interprétation. Donc on vous préviendra pendant la réunion s'il est résolu, mais dans l'attente, nous allons continuer la réunion en anglais et nous vous prions de nous en excuser. So we are together until 12:30, and I will explain you how the meeting will be organized. We will have an opening by Jean-François Abaud, the Executive Director of FMDV, and then a recorded message from Yannick Glemarek, the Executive Director of the Green Climate Fund. And then the meeting will be divided into 3 sessions that will gather all the diversity of the actors engaged in financing the climate transition in cities in Africa. And we thank all the great speakers we have today for these sessions. So the first session will be dedicated to the presentation of the new urban strategy from the GCF. The second session will focus on the development of national and regional investment portfolios through project portfolios and investment vehicles. And the third session will focus on the structuring of long-term strategies and instruments at the national and local level, with a focus on financial intermediation. And then for the last part, we will welcome the Minister Governor of Abidjan, who will be invited to react and make recommendations to improve the implementation of this new urban strategy in Africa. And each of these sessions will be moderated by my colleague, Juliana Davis, in charge of climate finance at FMDV. So you will be able to ask questions via the chat box of Zoom. And each session will have a small, short Q&A session. Then your questions will be able to be discussed by the panelists at that time. So now I'd like to invite Jean-François Abaud, Executive Director of FMDV, to present the objectives of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily, and welcome everybody. Thanks a lot for the speakers who are with us today. Thanks a lot with the participants also. And so I'm Jean-François Abaud, the Executive Director of FMDV. We are a global network of cities dedicated to promote and develop solutions to better invest and finance urban development. So this event today is organized with the GCF, and thanks again for the GCF for the support and the collaboration to make it possible. And the idea is really to have a discussion around how to better finance African cities and urban transition into a climate approach. This event will be organized under a policy action lab that FMDV has launched. The idea of the policy action lab is to see how to transform policies and strategies into actions by exchanging between practitioners. And we see here on this great panel that we have professionals from the finance, from DFIs, from private investors and other NDBs, and also with the presence of the Governor Minister of Abidjan, who also chairs the FMDV. The idea is to see, based on the GCF strategy, but also on the individual strategies from the institutions represented by the speakers, how to merge the efforts and the approaches in order to turn these strategy into actions. Most of the DFIs have developed some strategies, but also investment vehicles to help cities to finance their climate transition. But these instruments couldn't connect also with the projects led by local authorities, and we cannot speak with any mayors who don't say us that they have dozens of projects to finance. But on the other side, we see that resources are there from the MDBs, DFIs, but also the private investors that are with us. So there is a kind of market failure, and the demand doesn't connect with the offer and the supply of resources. So we know the explanation of that, the lack of capacities and expertise of cities and regions to formulate bankable projects, the creditworthiness of the cities, the legal environment, the level of investment needed by the cities compared to the level of investment from the investors. Many explanations, and you know that for most of you. But then there are solutions, and the solutions also are based on how to connect the different instruments existing from the public and private investors together with the public authorities from the national and local authorities. So how to make these different policies and strategy work together. And this is really the idea of today. It's to see who is doing what and how to connect some of these strategies. But the idea really of today's meeting is not just a one-shot. The idea is to see how to organize a dynamic in order to develop a portfolio of potential investment, and knowing that GCF with a new urban strategy that they are currently launching, we need to take this opportunity also to see how to better move together on this development of portfolio of urban projects. So we will invite all of you to present and share your experiences, but also to share what are for you the opportunities and the challenges to work together, and also to get the potential contribution of the GCF. So I will stop there. Again, really happy to be there. Thanks a lot for the GCF and all the participants, and I hope that these exchange will be fruitful, and that we'll follow up with additional event. Thanks a lot, and back to you, Emily.
Thank you very much, Jean-François. And now we're very happy to have a recorded message from Yannick Glemarek, the Executive Director of the Green Climate Fund. Please enjoy.
Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I am sorry not to be able to join you in person, but delighted to send this message as a contribution to the Policy Action Lab on the new GCF urban strategy in Africa. As the world's largest climate fund, 37% of our portfolio, or $3.3 billion, are invested in Africa, spread across 70 approved projects, including some multi-regional projects. We have also 22 national or subnational entities accredited to directly access our resources in the continent. This event is a timely opportunity to focus on the potential and challenges of urban growth in Africa. GCF plays an essential role in financing resilient urban infrastructure, addressing not only today's challenges, but also tomorrow's. This matters because more than 2/3 of the global population are expected to live in cities by 2050, presenting both opportunities and risk to the global response to climate change. Cities produce at least 58% of direct global emission and represent at least 21% of direct global emission reduction potential. Africa has the fastest rate of urban growth in the world. The number of people living in the continent's cities has doubled in the last 20 years and will double again by 2045, reaching over 1 billion. Rural to urban migration, as young people seek work and education, is an opportunity to harvest this unique demographic dividend to propel the economy of the continent, but also a challenge that will only intensify pressures on cities and infrastructure. Yet, despite the urgent needs, municipal governments face significant barriers in accessing funding for resilient infrastructure. With less than 4% of the largest 500 cities in developing countries considered creditworthy in international markets and less than 20% in local financial markets. GCF Urban Strategy seeks to address these challenges through catalyzing investment in 4 key areas, which have strong potential to deliver high-impact, cost-effective climate benefits at scale alongside local co-benefits. These areas are decarbonizing urban energy system, creating greater energy efficiency and climate resilience in building stock, promoting compact and resilient urban development, and enabling circular urban economies. For example, the Subnational Climate Fund, SNCF, managed by Pegasus Capital Advisor, leveraged $150 million in first loss equity from the GCF to mobilize $600 million of senior private equity for renewable energy, energy efficiency, and climate resilient buildings and waste management at the municipal level. 17 African countries participate in this program. As a second illustration, we helped the Development Bank of Southern Africa establish a dedicated climate investment facility, and will assist them to issue the first municipal bonds for recycled water to foster a circular economy and greater resilience to climate change in South Africa. This shows just a fraction of what is possible if, together, we can break down the barriers to climate-friendly investment and unlock the potential of urban development to foster prosperity and sustainability. I look forward to hearing your views on our urban strategy for Africa. Thank you very much for your attention and work.
And now I'd like to welcome Drazen Kusan, who's a sector lead senior urban specialist at the Green Climate Fund. And he will present us this new urban strategy we all want to hear about, which is called the new sectoral guide for the sector of cities, building and urban systems. And then after his presentation, we'll be able to have a Q&A session with him. So please don't hesitate to put your questions in the chat box. Thank you very much. Drazen.
Thank you very much. Can we have a presentation, please? And good morning, everybody. Thank you. So I'll be talking about the GCF views on paradigm shifting for climate impact and financing of green and smart cities in Africa. I would like to underline that this is still a sectoral guidelines that is under public consultation and has not been approved by the board. So we still have a public consultation going on, and this seminar and this webinar is part of this public consultation. We expect the guidelines to be approved by B31 by the GCF board, under consideration currently. Next slide, please. So the presentation, as I said, is based on the executive summary of the sectoral guides. We are trying to identify the key opportunities for high impact and transformational investment in the urban context. The discussion will hopefully set the context for the discussion of climate investment, how we contribute to the urban areas for climate change and vulnerability, and how do we see opportunities for GCF to foster transformational change in the sectors across Africa, and what are the key activities needed to implement the paradigm shifting. Next slide. Estimating the urban climate finance globally, we see a number of different sources. By OECD, $6.9 trillion will be needed for investment in energy, transportation, and water. sanitations, and telecom over the next 15 years to be consistent with 2-degree scenario with a 66% probability. The World Bank is suggesting that up to $400 billion will be needed to invest on a global scale for urban resilience. Failing to respond to climate change and natural disasters, cities worldwide cost will be about $314 billion every year. The Coalition for Urban Transition suggests that there will be 5 to 6 trillion required each year to meet human and economic development needed over coming decades. Therefore, the annual deficit in infrastructure investment is about 1 trillion a year. So these are all very frightening numbers. Next slide. Estimating what the urban climate finance opportunity really is globally, IFC suggests that cumulative climate investment is about 29.4 trillion in 6 urban sectors in emerging market cities by 2030, the bulk of which rests with green buildings, which covers both new construction and retrofits. And we'll talk a little bit more about it in our strategy. Coalition for Urban Transition suggests that low carbon cities are 24 trillion opportunity, equivalent nearly to 1/3 of the global GDP in 2018. So we do hope that all urban stakeholders in Africa should be interested in this opportunity. Next slide. The core of the GCF approach on paradigm shifts in pathways in the urban context is how do we tap into potential of cities to deal with the climate impact investment. So we see 4 main areas of intervention. One is the low carbon energy, hence we have to decarbonize the energy sector. Investing into 50 to 70% of renewables in energy mix, saving up to 35 to 45% of GHG at the cost of between $40 and $80 per megawatt by 2030, and by 2050 up to 90% reduction on the basis of the same trend. In energy efficiency, we are looking into improving building energy efficiency by 32% reduction in primary material consumption and associated GHG by 2030, and by 2050, 53% reduction in primary material consumption and associated GHG. In mobility and transportation, by 2030, 20 to 45% of emission reduction, and the same trend by 2050. With respect to the compact and resilient urban form, in urban form, we are looking for 20% emission reduction by 2030 and 40% emission reduction by 2050. In urban resilience, we have to optimize the disaster risk resilience and optimizing value for money through resilience enables, both for 2030 and 2050 scenarios. Finally, circular urban economy, materials and material flow, 32% reduction in primary materials by 2030, 53% reduction in primary consumption of materials and associated GHG by 2050. In waste management, similar numbers. Next slide. So overall rationale for our guidance is how do we link impact potential across the sectors to programming pathways and financing structures, right? So we all know what the global context is. Over 2/3 of population will reside in cities by 2050. We say 58% of global emissions and 21% of global emission reduction potential in urban areas by 2050. Some would say, for instance, the International Energy Agency is saying that there is already 71 to 75% of GHG emissions coming from the cities. So the numbers are different, but the impact is very significant. 75% of infrastructure is expected to be built by 2050, and 85% of the cities will experience climate impact. And in the same time, the cities generate over 70% of global GDP, but only 10% of climate finance has been disbursed on local level. So these are all significant challenges and barriers in the urban sector with respect to the climate change. Now, paradigm shifting pathways in GCF, the way we see it, or what we call transformative action fields, is 4. Yeah, we are going to continue to decarbonize energy system by distributed renewable energy, generation of energy from renewable resources at the community and household levels, and utilization of sustainable microgrids. I must say that interventions should not only be limited to supply, but also focusing on demand and how the green housing can actually regulate demand for electricity and energy. Energy efficiency in building stocks, retrofits of existing buildings and green standards in new buildings, compact and resilient cities. This is nothing new. Improved integration of multi-sectoral investment to mitigate the impact of heat waves, sea level rise, and bolster ecosystems, and of course, circular urban economy. which primarily should focus from climate perspective on reducing the methane emissions from the landfills. Deploying the GCF financial instrument to foster implementation of NDCs based on needs of mega and secondary cities. GCF will be fostering blended finance solutions appropriate for the depth, breadth, and sophistication of national capital markets, tapping into new sources of capital, and then matching the concessionality to non-monetized concessional benefits and climate benefits. We're going to continue supporting decentralized finance, enabling subnational entities to access climate finance and viable long-term funding mechanisms. We're going to be catalyzing and resourcing structures for leverage private sector financing, and eventually building both the number of direct access entities and their capacity to manage the GCF pipeline. Next slide. Theory of change is very important for GCF. The main theory of change for GCF suggests is that GCF promotes paradigm shifting in developing countries towards low emission, climate resilient development pathways in line with the goals of the UNFCCC and Paris Agreement, of course. So what we suggest is that if the GCF rapidly builds in an investment environment and mobilize resources to enable developing countries to identify, design, and implement transformational climate interventions, then the developing countries will demonstrably shift by 2030 towards low emission climate resilient pathway consistent with well below 2 degrees or 1.5 degree Celsius and global adaptation goals, because of the increasing share of climate compatible investment that will be catalyzed to deliver systemic change. So what we say is the paradigm shifting pathways will be based on the drivers of change. Drivers of change are transformational planning and programming, catalyzing climate innovation, mobilization of finance at scale, and expansion and replication of knowledge. So all urban stakeholders in Africa should, in our opinion, from climate finance perspective, follow the same logic of the same theory of change. And then we have four areas of intervention globally in terms of GCF. That's built environment, energy and industries, human security, livelihoods and well-being, and land use, forest and ecosystems. Next slide. We obviously suggesting there has been already a question whether we are focusing only on mitigation. No, we are not focusing only on mitigation. We are focusing also on the adaptation. Adaptation is, of course, much more difficult to program also in the urban sector. And we are going to try to focus on both during this presentation and during the discussion. The human settlements are vulnerable to the increasing impacts of climate change in the absence of a resilient infrastructure and planning. So we think that the majority of the problem comes from not mainstreaming climate change data into the resilient infrastructure and planning. These trends are expected to grow unless actions are taken to ensure that cities and urban areas are designed to enhance productivity, resilience, and innovation while reducing the carbon intensity. Such effort will not only generate economic benefits, but also address market failures, such as the urban sprawl, very well known in Africa context, congestions, and negative externalities of pollution and carbon emission. So we're going to continuously focus as Green Climate Fund on these sector challenges. In this context, we have to understand the difference in approaches between green and smart cities. We continue to pursue transformative pathways in urban systems as explained. We're going to be focusing on retrofitting megacities, but also supporting carbon neutral and carbon negative planning, orientation and development of secondary and intermediary cities. And obviously, we're going to provide our support and intervention in catalytic and innovative financing solutions. Next slide. In this respect, I think it is important for everybody to understand the difference between on a taxonomy between green cities and smart cities. The concept of green cities or green development is not new. Previously, it was couched with the term of sustainable development. It seeks to integrate climate, environmental, social, and economic consideration within the development process. So the green city are the cities which are advancing green, climate conscious and sustainable solutions. Green urban development considers how to improve and manage the overall climate considerations, quality of health and water, air and land, correlation to hinterlands and the wider ecosystem, ecoservices systems, and results benefits from both climate, environment, and residents. Next slide. So in terms of impact areas, what we say is, we repeat, but it's important. In terms of megacities, the present threat is that we need large-scale integrated energy efficiency, land use, and transport combined intervention, which requires non-business as usual project development implementation with 30% of GHG reduction. So proper interventions in megacities across the world, and that includes Africa, should be looking into the 30% of GHG reduction potential from energy efficiency, land use, and transportation combined intervention. In terms of secondary cities, we need to break the path dependence. One of the key transformational areas for cities identified by the special report 1.5 degrees Celsius by IPCC is to address massive surge of urbanization needed to follow the principles of sustainability and green growth. And interventions would include municipal planning, climate-friendly cooling, heating, energy technologies, construction standards, and green deliveries. Obviously, this is all connected to green transformation and green jobs. And finally, access to finance. Critical need for project development support and financing structure to facilitate access by a range of cities, utilize guarantee instruments, memorandum of understandings with cities financing facility, guidance and support of cities financing gap, PF fund, and so forth. So we essentially have to shoot from all calibers to address this mega problem for our urban context in Africa. Next slide. This looks a little bit maybe complicated, but I will explain. We have already identified the paradigm shift pathways for GCF. Yeah, so decarbonized distributed energy, energy efficient buildings, circular urban economy, and combat resilient urban forms in the context of urban sector. Of course, there will be other sector strategies, sector guidelines that will be dealing with infrastructure, with ecosystem services, and so forth. But from the urban perspective, these are the paradigm shift pathways, and then the drivers of change are transformational planning and programming, where we primarily try to strengthen the mechanisms to implement NDCs and urban climate targets, foster integrated urban transportation energy infrastructure development, and institutional strengthening. In terms of catalyzing climate innovation, we are looking into new business models that can reduce upfront capital cost requirements and tap new revenue sources such as pay-as-you-go schemes, land value capture elements, and so forth, and support integrated implementation of new technologies, new institutions, new urban development models, and so forth. In terms of mobilization of finance at scale, we are looking into the increased access of cities and city institutions to domestic and international capital markets through support of the pipeline development, catalyzing and participating in private sector funding vehicles such as the SPVs or PPPs, targeted investment in catalytic funds, city raisings and PPP structures, support to direct access entities, especially national development banks or regional banks such as BOAD, which is on this call, mechanisms to enhance the use of blended finance, I'm not going to read everything, and mobilization of national and global private investment in commercial funds. Finally, we have to look how to expand on and replicate the knowledge, developing knowledge products on business models through community of practice for each of the transformative action fields, utilize partnerships, partner with other agencies, which is part of this webinar as well, and effectively disseminate knowledge. Next slide. Just press one more time, please. So, GCF and city finance is obviously has a complicated scheme, and these are all of the factors that influence our decisions on how to look into how the city finance really can be organized around climate impacts. All we have to understand is that there are a number of action areas where we have to cooperate with other stakeholders. Within international institutions on mobilizing institutional finance, and also coordinating donor focus for efficiency and leverage, as well as encourage leverage of institutional finance and use of sub-sovereign modalities in particular. So the sub-sovereign financing for the cities is probably key to unlock potential for African cities. With national and subnational governments, we have to strengthen the enabling framework. With national commercial banks, development banks, regional banks such as BOAD or maybe a development bank of South Africa, we have to look into national capital markets and further development of national instruments, both in the public and private sphere. Of course, on city level, we have to support cities and city institutions to prioritize investments, to sequence investments, to understand the impact of the strategy, and to really streamline properly what is the necessary investment to maximize the climate impact. And finally, with the private sector, we have to provide support to private sector financing through special vehicles to enable private sector to de-risk transactions and leverage and eventually increase the share of private financing in climate impactful investments across urban sector. Next slide. I'm just repeating for those of you who do not know GCF or have not worked with GCF, we have 6 core investment criteria that are almost Bible. Whenever we are discussing any investment from GCF perspective, we look into the impact potential, paradigm shift potential, sustainable development potential, responsiveness to recipient needs, promoting of country ownership, and efficiency effectiveness, which comes very handy when countries or cities are asking for too much grant, right? So we are really trying to balance. Always remember this, the GCF financing is phenomenally catalytic, but also very, very concessional. It can go up to 0% interest rate and 40 years tenor with 10 years grace, meaning that we can actually deploy phenomenal concessionality for the best projects. But for that, to do that, we actually have to adhere to the very stringent investment framework and investment criteria. And obviously, we'll be happy to discuss this more during the webinar. Next slide. You know, if you may know, the Black Swan theory is based on the book of the Black Swan, The Impact of the Highly Improbable. It's a 2007 book by author and former options trader Nassim Nicholas Taleb. You know, my question to you is what COVID-19 is other than the Black Swan situation. It's a Black Swan event. So a central idea in the Taleb's book is not to attempt to predict, but to build robustness to negative events and an ability to exploit positive events. So the question is, how do we position green transformation and green climate investment towards an ability to, next time COVID-19 situation comes around, that we position ourselves better and be able to respond better to the challenges that we have at hand. So how simplistically we are thinking of the current economic crisis caused by COVID? That's the first question. And what is the range and the depth of our solution to this crisis, including green recovery option? Isn't this actually the best possible window of opportunity to get rid of the fossil fuel economy and kickstart the green economy based on a low carbon and highly resilient infrastructure? Next slide. So clearly, the green economy is of paramount importance for the global climate impactful investment, not only for Africa. Green economy seeks to maximize resilience in the face of climate or other impacts and to minimize emissions from supply chains and concentrated high energy production. What I'm asking the audience here today is economic cost, including external disbenefit of GHG emissions, benefits, including the impacts avoided by resilience investments and net benefits from the society, are in fact very different from market-derived expenditures, revenues, and profits. So we cannot think only in terms of the IRR, but we also have to think of the terms of the economic rate of return. And what do we actually do to actually properly account for the externalities, and what do we do to move away from pure focus on the expenditures, revenues, and profits, and we look into the broader social benefits that can benefit us from the green economy perspective for the longer period. Green transformation, green jobs, green shifts, and everything we need to rebuild our economies according to the green standards. Next slide. So again, we think that just look into what IMF is saying. IMF is saying the global expected economy will shrink and has shrinked over 5% in 2020, which is the steepest slowdown since the Great Depression of the 1930s. Hence my reference for the Black Swan event. The IMF is currently advising that fiscal stimulus packages should be based on green measures, but also recommending to scrap fossil fuel subsidies and taxing carbon altogether. And then obviously advanced economies of European Union, for instance, are doing this, but perhaps African countries are not following the lead. The question is what has to be done. So we really believe that building of green economy can provide the impetus for economic recovery and at the same time partially support achieving of just transition. And in the process, building green urban regional economies will be the major mechanism providing employment related to the green transportation, construction value chain, buildings, distributed energy, enterprise capital, and local agriculture. Next slide. And that will be it. I hope I have provided sufficient fodder for us to have a robust discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Drazen, for this extremely rich presentation. We're very happy to have you with us today. We're now going to a 15-minute Q&A session. Drazen, I'll start by a broad question. What do you believe are the strategies that are considered to engage more with the private sector, especially with the private financial institutions, on adaptation elements? So over to you, Drazen.
Thank you. So that, of course, the question is very complex. It also depends on the circumstances and on the region. What we have seen that works best from GCF perspective is that when our concessional financing is providing de-risking for the public sector investment with a significant climate impact potential that cannot be otherwise resolved by the private sector. So we intervene with the concessional financing where private sector cannot tap into specific project or specific pipeline. And then once we de-risk based on the eligibility criteria, certain investments, then we work with the private sector to leverage our existing investment and eventually turn from public intervention to private sector intervention. So it's really about de-risking. It is about preparing the projects. It is about tempering the pipeline to eventually meet the criteria of the private sector. It does not work always, but it works in some specific cases. It is also very important to suggest that we think that programmatic activities are more geared to private sector involvement than split individual projects that do not look into the holistic picture. That's one part of the equation. The other part of the equation is that the private sector, in my opinion, should look much more into the impact potential and impact investment strategies. As I underlined, it is no longer enough to focus on IRR. It has to be economic rate of return and how do we create wider social benefits. So maybe going less aggressively for the short-term returns, but going more systemically, holistically, sustainably for the longer-term returns and greater economic value to the overall population and society as a whole. I think that would largely improve the private sector positioning for the climate impactful investment. Thank you.
Thank you, Drazen. Another question, this time regarding consultations. Can you let us know what the process is for consultations? And also, is it only for donor governments or for members of the GCF Administrative Council?
Yeah, we have already organized 4 global public webinars on the topic of the sectoral guidelines. So we are engaging as wide range of stakeholders as possible. So primarily this is the board with their advisors. So all countries that are on the GCF, presented on the GCF board, are also deeply involved in the consultation process, and then essentially means all developing countries developed by the UN, represented by UNFCCC. But we have also seen 4 major consultation processes going on across the world, and we're going to continue to have the consultation process. It is very, we are very small staff. We have received more than 600 comments on the existing sectoral guidelines, and we are trying to be as inclusive as possible, but there are also limits to the process. So in short, the interventions will be done by the GCF board and advisors with all of the developed and developing countries present through the UNFCCC system, but also we'll try to continue to present the sectoral guidelines through regional workshops and collect as many comments as possible. So we are trying to make it as open, as transparent as possible, but there are also limits as to what we can do with a few people in a secretariat in Songdo. Over.
Thank you. Another question, this time from one of our panelists. What are your thoughts on the transformative pathways for improving resilience of African intermediate cities? What are the indicators, the metrics, and how are you working in this area?
Right. As I suggested earlier, building clever resilience interventions is probably one of the toughest challenge we have, not only as GCF, but as all stakeholders and partners in the sector. We are yet to see a proper program proposed by any of our partners institution into how we can put together a proper resilience intervention. So countries are not really dedicated to creating a longer-term reform to really properly understand and plan for the urban resilience and intervention. And we continue to have a dialogue with a number of partners of how we can best approach this. The issue is that we have too much of the piecemeal approach and far too little of the integrative approach, programmatic approach, that would forever change the way we plan for resilience in the African continent. So I think, first of all, there has to be a deeper dialogue between our core stakeholders, financial institutions, GCF, and other players, to see how we can create a longer lasting transformative paradigm shifts in terms of integrated planning that integrates the climate information into the way that we build, we plan and build for infrastructure. Once this is done, then maybe a next step can be done. But I mean, essentially, we have not seen deeper, more meaningful project proposals that are looking into the longer term range of investments in urban resilience. So it's a complex topic. Over.
Thank you, Drazen. I'll now give the word to Julia Macani from the EIB to ask a question. Please, Julia, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Drazen. This was a very informative presentation. I just have a question for you about how you plan to deal with small-scale projects. Because if you target secondary cities in particular, the scale of the project is going to be an issue. I know that we at the EIB, we are constantly having this discussion. So I was wondering whether the GCF has any plan to allow for aggregated projects, for instance, or other ways to scale up the project size. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia. This is a very good question. And in fact, you know, I'm now at GCF nearly 5 years, and all we have done under my leadership of the sector leadership was aggregated interventions. So we have built a $3 billion portfolio completely based on programmatic interventions in cities. So we do not consider at all small scale projects. What we do is, I must say this, I mean, obviously the GCF does have a very strong focus on direct access entities, but in terms of who delivers the best programmatic interventions is obviously MDBs. So some of our best urban projects are definitely delivered by the likes of African Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, World Bank, and so forth. And obviously, we are always open to EIB to see how we can create an integrated intervention. Essentially, what really happens is that you have usually a very strong technical assistance program that prepares pipeline of project interventions and eligibility criteria that then creates a framework for the programmatic intervention where we can actually plan for the longer period, 10, 15 years, and aggregate all of the small-scale interventions across multi-country program that then really deals with all integrities for secondary cities in a number of countries. So you have, another webinar should be focusing on, what we have done in 3 billion portfolio, but you have EBRD Green Cities Facility, for instance, that we have done. You have ASEAN Green Catalytic Financing Facility for the Southeast Asia. You have in Mongolia urban development focus. We have done a first project in China that deals with the decarbonizing of one of the most polluting Chinese province. So direct access entities are the future of the GCF, but for the big impactful interventions, we'll still heavily rely on NDPs. So it is built around programmatic interventions, long-term planning, and eligibility criteria for investment. Over.
Thank you, Drazen. One last question from our side. Are you planning to hold similar presentations for this guide on other regions, or is it only planned for Africa?
It has been already done. As I suggested before, we have done already 4 or 5 major presentations for each of the continents. We're going to try to continue to do so, but to the extent that is physically possible, because we are a small secretariat. So we have already done 4 or 5. We're going to do a few more. When and how it'll be announced through the GCF website. Over.
Thank you very much, Drazen. I now turn over to Émilie Mayara, our Deputy Executive Director at FMDV.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Drazen, for this really great presentation. It was really informative, and you presented well how you structured the new strategy in order to mobilize this very catalytic and concessional funds that you manage. And also the discussion highlighted well the issue of connecting all the stakeholders and the levels of intervention, the importance of sovereign finance to unlock finance for cities, the importance of special purpose vehicles, of developing strategies on resilience, and on articulating technical assistance projects to aggregate pipelines of projects in order to be able to reach the good level of intervention. So this is exactly the rationale of this discussion today. And now I'm very happy to welcome the speakers for the second session, which is dedicated to developing transformative regional and national portfolios of investment and increase impacts. So the idea is to discuss how to develop this portfolio of investments both from a pipeline of project point of view and from an investment instruments approach. And I will leave the floor back to Juliana. Thank you.
Thank you, Émilie. So we'll start with Mr. Thierry Dehaut from Meridiam. He's the Chief Executive Director. Thierry, over to you.
Thank you, and thank you all for the invitation to speak today. I'll use my 5 minutes perhaps to focus on sort of private sector solutions, and in particular, perhaps with one comment on the sort of the challenges that we see in developing resilience in cities and projects. Cities are actually the place where more challenges are acute versus what we used to see at central government, because they lack capacity in many ways, design capacities for projects, legal capacities, also project management capacities, and financial capacity. So what we've actually done to address these type of issues with the support of UNCDF and the Rockefeller Foundation was to try to design a project that addresses first the pipeline development, because I think that is the major hurdle in terms of being able to invest in city because of the size, because of the capacity of those cities. So we have what we call a catalytic capital facility in this particular 500 million fund that addresses that, but also with resources, which is really about helping cities develop their project and make them bankable projects. And to give you concrete examples, because we have a resilience screen that addresses those projects, that goes from adaptation to mitigation, but also to a number of other green aspects, but also resilience aspect from the social perspective. We are dealing, for example, with the coastal protection of Nouakchott, but also the waste and circular economy issues in the Nouakchott city, but also the retrofitting of the tram system in Addis Ababa to increase capacity and improve operational efficiency. So these are the type of projects that we're able to help cities develop, to identify the revenues that can support a longer term financing for private sector and make those quite bankable. The other side of the financing tool is actually an investment fund that allows cities to access capital, because part of this, it's actually called the International Municipal Investment Fund, also called the Urban Resilience Fund. Part of the goal is also to facilitate the access to capital for these cities. First, by helping them present bankable projects, but second, by really being a catalyst to other private sector players that may be able to fund these projects or to finance these projects. And for this part, which may be a transition to actually our next panel, we've actually secured a blended finance sort of pool of capital, especially with a number of participants in this panel being involved, like the European Investment Bank, to create a fund that was able to de-risk private sector investors and bring them along on the long term to support those projects. So clearly, addressing cities' resilience and investment and deploying more capital around cities has been for us really, but it has been true even in larger projects for governments, in particular in Africa. The initial phase of project development and project preparation is critical for the pipeline, and I think we cannot emphasize enough the need for capacity building, the need for training of civil servants working in cities, the technical ones, the ones that are leading the projects, as much as the sort of contractual leadership of the projects. And that is fundamental because, as we've seen raising this fund, the appetite from investors is there. But there is quite a lack of opportunities. So you have to create your opportunities as you go. We've had this experience over the past 6 or 7 years, generally in large projects for infrastructure in Africa, and we clearly can confirm that unless you create your own projects and you actually work on preparing it, it doesn't quite happen. Although there are a number of initiatives, especially led by some of the MDBs, to try to support these type of things. Last, and I think Dresden made a clear comment on the fact that private sector should focus on impact, and that is actually what we've done, because I think unless you position real impact goals together with financial returns, it's almost impossible to address these type of projects and be supportive of cities in development, because it is complex, because the group of stakeholders that you're addressing and engaging with is much more complex at a city level, with some fragile populations, and many of these portions of the cities are fragile. And quite clearly, unless you can have a clear guidance in terms of the impact and the resilience that you want to achieve next to the financial returns that you expect, it's almost impossible to do. And this is where the blended finance tools also helps de-risk, but also enhance returns for investors when taking risk at a sub-sovereign level very often, because I think that's also one of the difficulty that comes with dealing and engaging with cities. In Africa, often the central governments are supportive of capital cities in a big way, but you are still dealing with sub-sovereign level of risk. So thank you, and I'll be happy to answer questions later on.
Excellent, thank you, Thierry, and thank you for keeping up with the 5 minutes. For your information, all the speakers only have 5 minutes to talk, so apologies in advance if this seems like a very quick presentation. We're trying to have everyone having the same timing. We're now having Mr. Elia Loko. He's the Director of the Environment and Climate Finance Direction at the West African Development Bank. Over to you, Eli.
Many thanks, and good morning, everyone, and thanks again for inviting BOAD for this session, and congratulations to the GCF for this framework for sustainable urban development that was presented earlier on. So maybe just to give a bit of a context, obviously BOAD, we are a regional development bank, and sustainable development of our member countries, basically, which are the 8 countries forming the UEMOA bloc, the West African Economic and Monetary Union, are among the most vulnerable to climate change. When we look at all the vulnerability index, so it's actually a core challenge the bank is trying to tackle. So I will speak about what we are trying to do and what we've done, and let's say where the key perspectives will be in the near term. So basically, I think starting with our strategy that we launched last year, we are now basically moving proactively to reorient our portfolio into supporting resilience, climate change resilience. So the goal we have now is to allocate about 25% of our balance sheet from now till 2025 into climate change resilience. And we identified 5 key areas where we would like to be very active, notably renewable energy, the resilience of food and water systems, but also one key area will be the resilience, the urban resilience, green cities, which is an area where we have not basically done as much, but where the needs are huge. And we will also look at 2 other areas, how we can partner with private sector players and the financial sector to deploy more capital. And last but not the least, more on the resilience to climate shocks. So I think where we are now, most of the financing that we deployed for urban or rural or suburban or municipality level financing has mainly been done through the sovereign. So basically, to date, we deployed nearly €1 billion, but these were all primarily through sovereign loans to support these urban infrastructure projects. And we are more and more criticized to go directly to finance the cities, to finance the local communities. And for that, obviously, we need innovative solutions. And currently, we're developing with a few of our partners, and namely UNCDF and the Commission for the UMOA Commission and their dedicated body, which is a Council for Local Community Development, in setting up a facility that will basically help local governments, 100 local governments in the UMOA region, to basically integrate climate risk in their planning and the projects they finance. So with the support of obviously national governments, but how to integrate that process, I think, is something that is missing to date, and we believe is an area with a lot of potential, particularly in terms of the technical assistance that could be brought to those cities in terms of planning, understanding the climate risks they are subject to, and also in terms of capacity development, help them to reach the stage where they can raise financing themselves, just like other big cities in Africa, just taking the example of Cape Town, for instance, in South Africa, and other major cities, or Lagos, that are able to finance themselves. The majority are not yet there, so we will basically deploy more capital in technical assistance, and a partnership with GCF could be instrumental in that sense. Beyond that, what we are also looking at is that is what Thierry probably mentioned earlier on, is the lack of bankable projects. So I think there is an enormous need to have basically early stage equity capital to develop those projects, and that is what will enable development banks to do more on that. And this is an area where we think value could be added, and is part of the program we're currently developing. And the last segment will be basically blended finance, which was already mentioned earlier on, how we can leverage catalytic capital like GCF to de-risk those opportunities. So the project, or let's say the program we are developing, really for these targeted local governments in the region, with UNCDF will be is something we are very keen on, where we can, I think, resolve some of the key issues on scaling financing for urban or suburban resilience.
Thank you very much, Eddie.
I just wanted to add maybe one last piece, which is basically 2 other areas. So we are also working on developing sustainable transport projects, so e-mobility in Côte d'Ivoire, and also Togo, that have expressed strong interest. And finally, just to develop a regional program for urban resilience, which will basically map the climate risk and the opportunities, and basically develop the pipeline to enable development banks to really deploy capital. So many thanks, but that's basically the overview of what we're basically doing as BYD.
Thank you.
And sorry, I've reached the 5 minutes rule.
That's all right. Thank you, Eli. Now we're going to Giulia Macagno, who is the head of the City Climate Finance at the European Investment Bank. Giulia, over to you.
Thank you very much. So I'm very happy to be here. I have a short presentation. I will try to stick to 5 minutes anyway. So we are very much at the EIB working on developing pipelines of projects on urban resilience, but also low carbon infrastructure. And today I'm going to mention, going to focus on one initiative and mention another one. So can we go to the next slide, please? I don't need to go over this in detail. All the other speakers have already mentioned what are the main issues for cities in middle and low income countries for developing climate friendly and resilient infrastructures. We have been talking about enabling environment. We've been talking about the lack of capacity. What we have seen is the lack of capacity also to prioritize the needs and to define realistic investment programs. And also, of course, as it was already mentioned, the limited capacity to plan and to actually ensure the implementation of the projects, and then the limited credit worthiness, the fact that cities' ratings are often limited by the national rating as well. So there is all sorts of issues that limit access to finance for the actual project implementation. So as all the other speakers have said before me, there is a significant need for grants, not only for technical assistance, but also to develop blended finance instruments. And a lot more information on the current status of cities climate finance is available in the recent report that has been launched by CCFLA with support of our colleagues at the World Bank. So you can find the link here for more information. Next slide, please. The EIB is active in the areas of really supporting the development of pipelines. As I mentioned, I'd like to talk about a couple of initiatives. There's one that I'm directly involved with, which is the City Climate Finance Gap Fund. It's a joint EIB and World Bank initiative, and it consists of two parallel multi-donor trust funds that are operating very closely. We have two secretariats constantly in contact, and the EIB Trust Fund is operated in partnership with the German Cooperation and Development Agency, that is GIZ. The GAP Fund provides supports to cities, particularly with early stage technical assistance. And the focus is to develop both climate change mitigation and adaptation projects in urban areas. And it is targeted at all countries that are in the OECD DAC list. So not only Sub-Saharan Africa, but of course, Sub-Saharan Africa is very much a focus of the GAP Fund. More information on how to apply and what is eligible can be found on the GAP Fund website, citygapfund.org, that I encourage you to visit. And another initiative that is just in planning still, we are setting it up. It's the African Sustainable Cities Initiative, which I thought I would mention because it focuses on secondary cities, and it focuses specifically on the issues of access to finance, so to support them in accessing non-sovereign sources to finance their infrastructure needs. But it also provides capacity development for developing financing strategies, for instance, and foster access to investors. Next slide, please. So on the GAP Fund, more specifically, as we said, cities are crucial, and we need to focus on early stages of the project development cycle, because there are a number of project preparation facilities out there. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, and we don't want to duplicate what is already available. However, most of these facilities focus on the feasibility stage, and we have seen, together with colleagues in the World Bank and other IFIs, that there is really a gap in making projects go from an idea to an actual project. So this is why we are focusing specifically on the planning and strategy development phase and on the project definition and pre-feasibility stage with the GAP fund support. Next slide, please. So what do we offer? This is only technical assistance. It's important to mention that we are not, with the GAP fund itself, we're not financing project implementation. We're only focusing on technical assistance, and we can provide a wide range of options for support. We can go from supporting the climate strategy development, or to analyze the climate potential of plans, strategies, or investment programs that the cities may have already developed. We can provide capacity building for developing low carbon and climate resilience urban projects, and we can support also the prioritization of investments that are part of a broader strategy. If we go further down the line in the second stage of the project development cycle, at the pre-feasibility stage, the GAP fund can provide support in defining a project concept, completing or preparing parts of feasibility studies, pre-feasibility studies, sorry, and also we could provide support in defining what is the most appropriate financial structuring for different projects. And another big part of what the GAP fund is going to do is support the matchmaking. So really, since we intervened so early on, it is crucial that projects that received support from the GAP fund are then sort of picked up by other project preparation facilities that already exist. So we also aim to facilitate that. And of course, last point, since we have, since each project is unique, we are very happy to look into how to fill different gaps in the project preparation, because the idea is to make sure that we get with stronger projects to the actual feasibility stage, which increase the likelihood that the projects will be financed and will be implemented. So
Thank you,
I
Julia.
think I've concluded. Yes, that's good. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Now we're going to Megha Mukin, who is a senior economist and a team leader for competitive cities at the World Bank.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks a lot. I'm pleased to give you a brief overview of how the City Resilience Program, or the CRP, at the World Bank is contributing to this very important agenda. CRP takes on the responsibility to deliver services that World Bank Group project teams require for their project preparation and the delivery. We work in about 90 cities spread out over 50 countries. The focus is really on promoting urban resilience, and the CRP team does this via 3 tools: planning, finance, and partnerships. Next slide, please. Our planning tool is really focused on helping our clients plan better for future shocks. In many of our client cities, this is very much about planning for adaptation against increased frequency and intensity of floods, but also earthquakes, landslides, and other shocks that commonly have large effects on densely populated urban regions. When I say densely populated, I mean dense in terms of people, but also in terms of physical capital. We also help our task teams crowd in financing, in particular from private capital markets, and this could be via technical assistance. So for instance, in Jordan, using land value capture instruments, or via guarantee instruments or viability gap financing. And lastly, in our role as convener, we also help to facilitate partnerships. For instance, to facilitate reforms to attract private financing for public infrastructure projects, usually aimed at disaster risk management in these cities. Next slide, please. I'd like to leave you with 2 examples of projects that sort of exemplify the challenges that our clients face and the sort of support that we provide in response. The first example is in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. The challenge has been an area next to the city center which floods regularly. I'm sure that this is fairly common in a lot of the clients and cities that you yourselves deal with. Because of its location, any adaptation measures would be associated with large increases in economic opportunities, whether for households, for firms, or for local governments. So CRP helps our task teams with the diagnostics that help make the case for a package of flood mitigating investments. In this case, they totaled about $130 million, demonstrating how these would unlock the land for property development in an inclusive but also a fiscally sustainable way for the city going forward. Next slide, please. The second example, and this is one that's particularly close to my heart, I've been working there for a few years, is in Bamako, the capital of Mali in West Africa. Bamako is a capital city. It's been growing quickly, but it has large pockets of underdeveloped and underserved areas. The challenge has been how to use the window of opportunity to build better at the very outset in a place where the demands on the public purse are very high and subnational capabilities are quite low. CRP has helped the team to use high-resolution satellite imagery and machine learning to map out the different typologies of land use and built-up areas in the city. This is then overlaid with information on flood risk, an inventory of public assets, and on service delivery, which then allows the team to identify opportunities for a stream of investments, including for transport infrastructure, for markets, waste management, and so on. So this is a really quick look at what CRP does. I want to highlight the ability of the program to really tackle complex interrelated challenges of urban development that helps our clients and cities to meet the climate adaptation objectives, but at the same time to also create climate mitigation co-benefits. And thanks to Julia for speaking so eloquently about what the GAP Fund does. So I'm not going to speak to that because that was already covered. At the same time, meeting the climate adaptations and co-benefits, climate mitigation benefits, we also really focus on simultaneously crowding in private capital going forward. So let me stop there and happy to respond to any queries after this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Megha. So now we're going to a very quick Q&A. If any of your panelist colleagues would like to raise their hands, they're more than welcome. Otherwise, you have the chat window that's available for you. If not, I can start by breaking the ice by a very quick question, just going back to what you were saying about climate mitigation co-benefits. Is there an existing methodology to define climate co-benefits? Over to you, Megha.
Yeah, so I think we're working with several partners to come up with how we would do that. A variety of principle-based approaches are about how the cities can be built to be more compact. Think a little bit about, the use of energy and transportation systems in buildings and so on. But ideally, what we're trying to do is come up with a model that can bring together all of the different structures, whether physical or economic, within a city, and then see how the interventions that the bank is financing and that CRP is then supporting can provide an example of how you could, how we could basically maximize the climate co-benefits that would follow from that. Happy to share the methodology in detail for anyone who's interested. Thank you.
Excellent. Maybe a question for Thierry. How do you think Meridiam could support DFIs in these matters? Over to you.
That's what I do every day. But no, I'm a big believer in partnership, especially with the DFIs in those countries and for those cities, because we do share some DNA in terms of longer perspective, but also align methodology when it comes to assessing impact and really focusing on what can be impactful when it comes to resilient cities. So I think in those jurisdictions, it's almost essential that private sector collaborates and partners with DFIs, and this has been what we've been doing for the past 16 years, and that's the best way to go through all the difficulties and the challenges that are ahead of us in terms of developing projects.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Thierry. I might now go to Emily. who is going to do the wrap-up for this session. Thank you to all the panelists. Emily, over to you.
Thank you very much, Juliana. So we had a very great session, which highlighted the importance of partnerships, in particular to develop blended finance and to find innovative instruments and partnerships to support technical assistance, early stage project preparation. And there is a need to reinforce our joint instruments to leverage catalytic funds, to de-risk private instruments. So thank you very much for this great discussion. There is still a lot of work to do. And then we will go to the next panel. We will talk about investment vehicles as incentives for blended finance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emily. So for this panel, we will start by giving the floor to Natalie Gartman. She's an ESG and Impact Manager at Pegasus Capital Advisors. Natalie, over to you.
Thanks so much for having me and the opportunity. So I will present the Subnational Climate Fund today during this session. My name is Natalie. As said, I'm the ESG and Impact Manager at Pegasus Capital Advisors. So Pegasus is a private equity impact investing firm. We are accredited by the GCF, which allows us to partner with the GCF to enhance blended finance and to enhance climate action. And we are the investment manager of the Subnational Climate Fund. We have a really great consortium, so we have exceptional partners, which helps us to bring the most impactful projects into the fund. Next slide, please. So the Subnational Climate Fund is a global blended finance initiative. We seek to invest in mid-sized, low-carbon infrastructure and nature-based solutions in countries most vulnerable to the consequences of climate change. So on the right-hand side, you can see our focus areas. So it's basically 3 themes. Firstly, we focus on investments in the sustainable energy solution sector. So that includes small to mid-sized solar, energy, wind, but also biomass projects and energy efficiency solutions. Secondly, we invest in waste and water management. So for instance, we look into recycling facilities, but also water treatment solutions. And thirdly, we invest in nature-based solutions, which are projects that protect, sustainably manage and restore natural or modified ecosystems. So that can be, for instance, sustainable agri or aquaculture. So the Subnational Climate Fund is a blended finance instrument, meaning that we have a first loss investment of up to 150 million committed by the Green Climate Fund. And we also have a grant-funded technical assistance facility managed by IUCN and also supported by R20 and Gold Standard. And this really helps, and it was addressed or mentioned already a couple of times during the sessions, but this really helps us to also make projects bankable for our pipeline by, for instance, financing feasibility studies, or also to make studies on the impact and ESG side, or whatever the need is for those projects. Then in addition, we have the Pegasus network in the infrastructure, water and energy segment, but then also we have a great network through our partners, so R20 and IUCN, through local touch points, and then this also helps to have a better pipeline. And regarding our portfolio strategy, so we follow a diversified portfolio strategy, not only sector-wise, but also geographically. So we seek to invest in 15 to 25 scalable mid-sized projects, which means the projects are between 5 to 75 million. So there's quite a range. And geographically, we spread the investments across Africa, Latin America, Asia, and the Mediterranean. And as said, we have the 150 million commitment by the GCF. The total target size of the fund is 750 million, and the target IRI is between 12 and 50%. And I think what's exceptional about the fund, so we will verify and certify the impact of the fund and also from the project according to gold standard methodology, thereby really proving that our investments actually achieve the impact in the real economy. And this then also gives assurance to our investors. So next slide, please. I think there was a final slide, but maybe it's not included. I just wanted to highlight the fact that very soon, R20, our consortium partner, will launch a call for proposals. So the submission platform will be available on their website. It should be accessible or online by the end of this month. So feel free to contact R20 or feel free also to contact me or our team directly. Happy to put you also in touch with the investment team, whatever your need be. So thanks a lot for the opportunity, and back to you, Juliana. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Natalie. We now go to Kome Johnson Azwara. She's an Associate VP Investments at the Africa Finance Corporation. Kome, over to you.
Thank you, Juliana. Morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to give or talk very briefly about the Africa Finance Corporation, what it is we do, our focus and our strategy with regards to sustainability and climate finance, and the ways in which I think we could potentially partner with GCF and other organizations on building more climate resilient urban cities. So a brief introduction about the AFC for those who do not know us. The Africa Finance Corporation is an Africa-based, Africa-run institution that invests in Africa. Our primary focus is infrastructure investing, and we are an investment grade rated multilateral financial institution. We were established in 2007 between a treaty between public and private sector investors. To date, we have disbursed almost $9 billion. We have $7.3 billion in total assets and equity of about $2 billion. Our investment footprint is across 35 African countries. We invest in 5 key sectors: power, heavy industries and telecoms, natural resources, which includes mining, and transport, which also includes logistics and water infrastructure. Now, specifically with regards to sustainability and climate finance, as an African institution that's focused on investing in infrastructure in Africa, we really take it upon ourselves and believe that we really need to be a leader when it comes to sustainable investing across the continent. And because, like many know, Africa contributes the least to greenhouse gas emissions and is the most vulnerable to climate change, we believe that we need to approach investing on the continent differently to most of the other institutions. And what do I mean by that? We take a more holistic approach and try to really think about and keep in consideration what it means to invest in Africa. What are the various community needs or challenges, and how do you keep this context in mind while still trying to invest in a sustainable way and make the requisite impact on the continent. So we are an accredited institution with a Green Climate Fund. We've been accredited since 2015. We also have several institutions that we partner with, including the AFD and a few of the others that are on this panel session today. We're also a member of the Global Innovation Lab for Climate Finance, which does a lot of work in terms of creating new and innovative instruments, which I think is particularly relevant to the conversation today about developing instruments or blended instruments or pools of funding that can be used to support resilient urban infrastructure. Now at the AFC, we have several teams that we believe could support in the development of these ideas. We have our project development team, which I think is particularly relevant because a number of the other panelists today talked about a need for grant funding and early stage funding, which is exactly what our project development team does. They come in early stage to support feasibility studies and analytics to understand how can this project be structured to actually ensure it's bankable. We also have our advisory team that can work both with the private sector and with governments as they try to develop these types of projects. And then we have our country relations team, which also often works with governments in terms of crafting ideas, setting up, roundtable sessions or think tank detailed focused discussions to help them better articulate their ideas and sort of merge policy with the reality of what the private sector can do. Then within the investments team, I've already mentioned the sectors that we focus on, but we also have a product solutions team, which works a lot with governments as well, but specifically from a financing perspective. And I know this is something that has been discussed a lot about a need for financing. And so product solutions can provide financing to governments to help them actually support, again, the development of some of these types of projects. Now within the investment,
if you can start wrapping up.
Okay, thank you. Perfect, because I'm getting to the end. Within the investments team, we focus a lot on the private sector support. And we have what we call an ecosystem approach where we do like to provide holistic support. So not just supporting a project, but a program, which I believe is what the GCF is trying to do, have a more programmatic approach. So we can bring our various sector specialists. We can offer blended finance instruments in partner with the GCF or other institutions. And I think these are some of the ways in which we can help structure and have real impact in various countries across the continent. So thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Komi. And now over to Jussi Tapio, who is an operations officer at the IFC, International Financial Corporation. Just un petit commentaire pour les francophones, la traduction est disponible, l'interprétation simultanée, en bas à droite sur votre écran. Thank you, Jussi. You can go ahead.
Thank you, Juliana. I have a couple of slides which have tried to calibrate to stick with the 5 minutes. So let's see how it goes. Thank you very much for GCF and the FMDV for the invitation for this great and very timely event. And thank you for the other panelists. It's been really great to hear all the ideas and the views what you have shared. Of course, being a little bit on the later side on the speaking slot, it's a bit challenging because a lot has been covered already. However, I'll try to see if I can fill some of the gaps which there may be. So my name is Jussi Tapio Lehmusvaara. I'm an operations officer at the IFC, International Finance Corporation, which is the private sector arm of the World Bank Group. I am from the blended finance department, where we do concessional blended finance together with IFC's own account investments. In the next couple of slides, I'll give you an overview of IFC's blended finance approach, our city's business model, and a couple of key messages in going forward. First, very quickly, what we mean when we talk of blended concessional finance. It means that we combine concessional finance from different partners or third parties with the IFC's own account finance or investments. So that means that we can leverage with the concessional part, we can leverage IFC's own account and the third party investing for impactful projects. You see here in the middle, now let's start from the bottom. We see that the permanent subsidy it's mostly for those projects which are fully subsidized or supported by governments or NGOs. You move a little bit higher and you have projects which are not fully commercial, however, which need long-term subsidy. Then on the higher end, you have fully commercial activities, which are usually cleared by commercial investors. Then one step low, you have DFIs coming in with higher risk commercial activities. And in the middle is what we do with concessional blended finance at IFC for projects which are not fully commercial, filling the temporary gap in the market and therefore catalyzing private sector investments. Next slide, please. We have 5 key principles that we govern and manage the concessionality within IFC. The first one is extremely important. It's the rationale or the economic case of using a subsidy or concessional finance. And this one, every single project that we that we propose to have a concessional trans, it has to follow all these 5 principles. And we start with the economic case. Does the project really need concessionality? And this is to avoid any kind of market distortion that providing concessional finance may have. Second principle is crowding in minimum concessionality. That's a key goal as well. So we can really focus on those most impactful, high impact projects and then crowd in private sector financing. Third principle is commercial sustainability. We only look at projects where we see that they are on a solid commercial basis. The fourth principle is reinforcing markets. They have to be, each deal has to be structured effectively and efficiently so that it addresses the market failures. And the fifth and the last principle is promoting high standards, which means that the clients that we engage and invest in, they have to be fully aligned with IFC's policies and procedures, including corporate governance, environmental impact, social inclusion, integrity, disclosure, transparency, and so forth. These are the 5 key principles that we use when we deploy or use concessional finance alongside IFC. Next slide, please. A quick snapshot on what we do. So you see that we operate in the full spectrum of almost all sectors that one can think of related to cities, including water waste, energy efficiency, transport, financing, social aspects, smart cities, and street lighting. The cross-cutting themes on the lower bar, what you see are we have basically 4 kind of main pillars or main themes that we aim to address when we do our operations at in cities, especially. So infra needs,
wrapping up.
yes, access to commercial financing, social environmental risk, and climate-friendly solutions. A couple of examples where we operate. In the blue, you see the ongoing IFC engagements in these countries and cities. In purple, prospective, and in the light blue, the additional focus, what we do currently with the World Bank. Investment cases, so we do both investing and advisory. It's kind of an integrated support for African cities. This one I don't go too much into detail. A lot has been covered. There's a huge agenda. There's a huge opportunity within the cities in Africa. That's there's no doubt on that. Please go to the next slide. Sorry. Here you see the countries. Let's go to the next slide. It's like over half of the Africans will be living in cities by 2050, 1 billion by 2040, and 60% in cities and urban areas have some combination of various challenges which we aim to address. Next one, please. We have a tool which is called APEX, APEX, which is really an investment planning tool for cities that the city officials, potential investors can use, and it brings that really solid diagnostics, like how can the city achieve a low carbon investment path and opportunities. It looks at energy, water, transport, and waste. And then you can create, with the tool, you can create an action plan for your city. And then you can also aim to have a Apex city. It's kind of a green city label or branding for a city. Next slide, please. And this is the last key messages. Cities are really, they are drivers of growth. 80% of GDP comes from cities. However, they also consume 2/3 of the energy produced and 70% of carbon emissions. COVID has really highlighted the gaps what the cities, especially in Africa, have, and we really need to focus on this green rebuilding after the COVID. Hopefully, it's soon over. At least starts to get on the better side. So blended finance we see as a key tool what we can use to help move the cities in Africa to a low carbon and climate resilient pathway. And the last slide, please. We do work with cities and develop sustainable long-term plans and partnerships, so that we can really, as I think Drazen mentioned in the beginning, that we have to look for those longer-term solutions, longer-term paths, not only of the kind of a more shorter-term investment. So that's what we are trying to do. Blended finance will be a critical tool in unlocking and really de-risking those opportunities so that we can get those high impact projects over the finish line. And the last point, it's extremely important that the providers and partners in the area of concessional finance, such as the Green Climate Fund, will strongly support these solutions and help African cities build those resilient infrastructure. Of course, this will need a lot of kind of risk appetite and flexibility so that we can really address the challenges what the cities and the capacity that cities currently have. So that's it. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't go too much over time, and happy to take any questions after this session. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jussi, and thank you, Goma and Natalie as well. Maybe a very quick question on concessionality. I think that's a topic you all addressed. What are your thoughts on the financial instruments that are being developed to address this need to have the minimum level of concessionality? If anyone of you wants to intervene, please go ahead.
I'm happy to share my thoughts on this. So of course, as it was mentioned earlier, I think the concessional rate, it's a de-risking element. It helps us really to kick off, especially with the subnational climate fund, to start investing and to also in the fundraising part. And then in addition to that, I also want to mention, as a private equity investment firm, we are still interested in also generating returns. So, I mean, that's also our mandate. And of course, the additionality through the impact, of course, that plays a key role. But just to say that I think the concessional rate, it helps on both sides. So the de-risking, but still to be within our mandate.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Now I'll go over to Emily for a quick wrap up after this session.
So thank you everyone for this great session. You really illustrated well what Thierry Deo said in the last session. Appetite for investors is there. And you all demonstrated that blended finance has a unique role to play in support to urban resilience, through supporting both technical assistance and investment. And now we're going to the next session, so the session 3, on structuring long-term strategies and instruments with a focus on national and local urban climate strategies, and another focus on financial intermediation. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. We'll start with Marcus from the African Development Bank. Marcus is the coordinator of Urban and Municipal Development Fund of the AFDB. So please, Marcus, go ahead.
Thank you very much. And also thanks a lot for inviting me. I wish you all a very warm and rainy good morning from Abidjan. Thanks for putting up the slides. You probably all know African Development Bank. In our approvals in the last pre-pandemic year for climate projects was around $2.1 billion, of which we were able to mobilize around a third from climate finance institutions, very little from the GCF, but mostly from other sources. And around 2/3 are coming from, I would say, more traditional finance sources. So it is not only that we are investing climate finance, but also traditional finance for climate projects. And it's roughly 2/3, 1/3 division between mitigation and adaptation. Most of our finance goes to large-scale electricity projects, energy projects, transport, a little bit in urban areas, but also, national and transnational projects. And most of our adaptation goes to the agriculture sector. So here, emblematic, the three pictures for the three, biggest shares of our climate investments. And now if I see this reality at AFDB and I look at the urban sector guidelines from the GCF, congratulations on those, I see that really there are like other priorities set. And so I'm asking myself a little bit, what can AFDB do and maybe do more in the future to work with these sector guidelines for more green cities? Please click. No, on my presentation, please. This is a graph that shows you the diverse continent we're operating in. So we have from least urbanized low-income countries to highly urbanized higher middle-income countries. We have huge countries, small countries. We have the poorest nations. We have the G20 economy. So it's an absolutely diverse ecosystem we're operating in, and so it's very hard for us to develop the mechanisms. And the question mark is really there to also as an opportunity for all of you to help us strengthen our approach in this area. And next slide, please. So we have recently launched two mechanisms. Can you put the next slide, please? Two instruments, sorry, that will help us move our reality a little bit in support of the sector guidelines. And one is the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program to more systematically identify and integrate climate risk and vulnerabilities in all our projects, and of course also in urban projects, and to increase our investments in adaptation. You saw our mitigation focus, so to balance more adaptation and mitigation. And very interesting also the recently launched instrument, Urban and Municipal Development Fund, is a multi-donor trust fund that's really accelerating our work with cities on the continent. So to systematically again help cities to improve their capacities in project formulation, project identification, and also to more solidly support capacity development of cities in this area, forming networks, offering trainings and these sort of support we're offering. And it's also our vehicle to roll out our African Cities program, which we're very excited about, and which we hope to reach more and more cities to really develop those climate projects, and especially this climate resilience projects. And in general, accelerating our urban development support across the continent. Why I wanted to mention that we have those instruments in place. I think we are now moving into developing the mechanisms and programs to really move from the kind of projects that we all do and we all know and we all love, to really the frameworks to come from one project to this kind of multiple projects, and what Thierry and Elie were saying on developing these huge pipelines to scale up climate finance. And this is really something that we're currently developing, sort of in our AFDB City program. We try to have a green focus there, whether it's green cities or climate compatible cities, to really use the GCF or work more closely with the GCF and others to move those projects on our side and then have them readily made for climate investments. Because I think as a DFI, as a multilateral development bank, we need to go beyond projects. We need to support national development banks with lending for them to do the projects. And we need to move away from this kind of time-consuming work to really scale up. Then on the last point is I was asked what are my, and sorry, I'm already at 5 minutes, just wrapping up on my feedback on these guidelines. And this is really important for us to mention that, Africa, I always hear developing countries, but it's such a diverse continent requiring really diverse approaches. We have G20 economies that can apply sophisticated financial instruments, and we have other countries that are really needing basic local capacity building, planning to really move into this kind of opportunity for climate finance. And at the same time, I think we do need to ask the GCF for support in advocacy to national governments to really demand those climate investments on a broader scale. And the last point, and I see you, you're trying to cut me off here, which I totally agree, is really that we would like to really have a pledge that the time and the cost of developing climate projects has to come down. And we want to work with you how to do that. You trust us with a lot of money from the GCF, but I think you can also trust us with identifying those projects and reviewing those projects to really bring down the costs and the time of preparing those. Those was my last point, and happy to answer any questions, and sorry for taking a bit over the official time.
Thank you, Marcus. Very comprehensive presentation. Now we go over to William Mugabu. He's a green economy specialist at the Ministry of Environment of Rwanda. William, over to you.
Thank you so much, FMDV and GCF for inviting us on this webinar. And I would first want to appreciate that the presentation done by Drazen on the new strategy for the GCF. A lot of ideas have been shared by different speakers, but I would just want to go straight to this, some of the priorities that we have identified as a country. Also from the Ministry of Environment perspective, we pursue the growth of the cities or urbanization as one of the priority pillars for the growth of the country as identified in our vision 2050. But there is also in the short-term strategies that we have to accelerate the urbanization rate to from 18 to 35, which is a bit ambitious, and it will definitely come with challenges in terms of building cities resilience and the urban systems that we want. Part of the national long-term strategy for climate resilience and low carbon, that is the Rwanda's Green Growth and Climate Resilience Strategy. It envisions to promote green urban transition and integration that ensures low carbon and smart infrastructure services. So this is the national planning or the national plans that we have. I didn't go into details, even in Rwanda's NDC that also focuses on urbanization also as a key sector to be considered developing. I will just have picked one project that we have started working on with the GCF, which is the Green City Kigali. I'm happy that Drazen, who presented this, already knew the project that we are working on in the Green City Kigali. It mainly has some few elements related to addressing the issue of affordability, but also climate resilient housing. We also have the commercial part of it, which actually makes it, we are currently in the phase of finalizing the business model for this project, whether it will be purely a PPP model or private sector model of business. But the tendency is that it will definitely be a PPP model where public investment, but also private sector would join to invest in this project. I won't read each of these, but the project looks to reduce on the emissions in terms of the interventions that are envisaged in the project, but also it will look into increasing the resilience of the communities and ecosystems within the city of Kigali. So there is much of the opportunity for investments, and the equity investments would actually come in while we are finalizing this project. And there is a lot, I think, from the private companies, even here, or the organizations that can be interested to partner with the government of Rwanda. Currently, we haven't really finalized the feasibility studies that indicate the overall cost for the project, but on the portion that we expect to get funding from the GCF, we are estimating around 50 million to specifically invest in increasing the resilience, improving the infrastructure, the climate resilience infrastructures within the existing neighborhoods in the Kigali, in the Kinyinya sector. But also we expect also investments from other private sector operators to come
William,
in.
if you can start wrapping up, please.
Yes, I'm actually at the final slide. I would say that this project is really a good opportunity for investing in climate resilient cities, and everyone, we are actually opening up for different partners to come in, and we make sure that this will serve as a pilot that can even be scaled into other secondary cities. Thank you so much. I think I've...
Thank you, William.
Yes.
Thank you very much. So if anyone has any questions, please, you can raise your hands before we finish. I see no questions, so I'll turn over to Emily for a wrap up.
Okay, so now we're going to go to the next session. Thank you very much. On the role of public financial intermediation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emily. So we will start with Frédéric Audras from the French Agency of Development. He's the head of Urban Development Planning and Housing Department. Please, Frédéric.
Thank you, FMDV and GCF. I will be quick because many issues have already been raised by other participants, such as the link between cities, climate, urban climate, and a lack of capacity, lack of bankable projects. A lot of figures also have been presented, notably concerning urban growth in Africa. So first, I would like to say that we all share the same approach, which is a client-oriented approach, and our clients, for my division, our clients are the cities. Why? Because AFD is fully aligned with the Paris Agreement 2015 and with those climate objectives, and also with the SDGs. And we consider that cities are at the heart of these objectives. They play a key role in climate adaptation and mitigation policies. This is why in AFD, we are implementing a specific sustainable city strategy based on 3 points. First, we are considering cities in a territorial approach, and cities are the key actors to support there. We are trying to develop flexible financial instruments, and we are enforcing our dialogue with intermediate cities. We are putting in place a specific focus on intermediate cities, especially in Africa. This sustainable cities strategy has a transversal approach, of course, with a climate and cities approach. So I will be quick. I will say first that what we are doing, we are supporting in Africa, especially the decentralization processes. For example, in Senegal, with a project PACASEN, which supports 123 cities, which is basically 20% of all cities in Senegal. We are helping them to reinforce their budget management, their financial performance. We have a financing parallel. We have a parallel financing with the World Bank on this specific project. Second, we are supporting specialized financial institutions such as the Fonds d'équipement communal. I've seen there is one participant from Morocco here. This project is supporting 80 different municipalities to enforce the capacities and to provide them some financing to finance their specific projects, sustainable urban projects. Last week, we have launched a new project in South Africa with private investor, with Inca, and with the Swiss cooperation, which is called EMDF. It's a specific financing vehicle to finance intermediate cities in South Africa. So it will start. I hope we will have a lot of success with this new project, but that's a new way, that's a more innovative way for us to provide financial resources to intermediate cities. Another way is to provide direct financing to local governments, to cities and their urban operators. We did that in Cape Town, of course, South Africa, Cape Town, Joburg, but we also did that in Senegal with the city of Dakar, or in Ouagadougou. We did that with in Morocco, for example, with Holding Al Umran. We have a current project on appraisal with them now. So of course, there are many challenges to be found. Of course, the rating, the creditworthiness of those municipalities, but for AFD, we have the possibility to do that, direct financing, and we wish to do that if it's possible, institutionally or financially. Another way is we are trying to support local banking sectors, providing, we'll say, a guarantee instrument such as CITIRIS. CITIRIS will be developed in Africa. It will be a way for us to provide guarantee to local banks. They can be private or public, in order that they finance local governments, they finance municipalities. So that's a way to create a kind of incentive to encourage them to support municipalities. It will start certainly next year, by the beginning of 2022, with the support of the European Union. And another way also to support municipalities is to prepare and accompany the projects. And what is important for us is that, especially in Africa, we have a dedicated preparation facility, project preparation facility, which is called CICLIA. Is funded by the European Union, by the Swiss cooperation and AFD, with the objective of supporting 20 to 25 different cities in launching urban, low carbon and resilient infrastructure projects in sub-Saharan Africa. So it was put in place in 2019. It was a great success because we will soon ask for, we'll say, a top-up from the European Union and maybe also for other European partners. This facility, yes, was a success. So we hope to get extra funding by European Union soon. It worked really well, and it has also an important transformational effect because for example, when we have finance through this facility, I would say a feasibility study for a project for a city, I would say 90%, we have the opportunity also to finance directly this project with other donors. So it works really well.
Frédéric, if you can start wrapping up, please.
Yes. So that's the end of my short presentation. So we try to develop in the future many other kind of technical assistance and many other possibilities to finance what we have called this gap to create a bankable project for cities. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Frédéric. Now we go over to Helmut Schon, who is the city development expert and principal manager at KfW. Helmut, over to you.
Well, thank you very much for having me here in this session. And I think it's quite challenging to be at the far end of the presenters, and because most of the things have been said, and it's hardly to add something. Let me say a few words about KfW. KfW is the German development bank acting on behalf of the German government in implementing the bilateral development cooperation. That means the orientation and the sector focus, etc., comes in most of the cases in most of the countries from the central, from our government. And I think this is important to know, that we are not that flexible in which sectors we are working. But looking at Africa and the sector, what we are in Africa doing, I think we have quite a significant urban portfolio in Africa, which is about the commitments made the last 5 years, about 1.8 billion euros in urban development bank development, whereas I think about 45% are climate relevant. But as my colleague from the BOAD said before, traditionally it's through the government, and most of the funds go to sectors, to the energy sector and to the water sector. On the another share goes through our, let's say, our natural partners, which are national or regional development bank, like the BOAD, like DBSA and others. And only a very little amount goes directly to cities, because sub-sovereign lending for us is a very challenging issue. And I think as someone who can provide hard currency, I think we should not always forget who is covering the currency risks for cities with their, when they take up a loan. And this is, I think, very challenging to provide local currency. I think looking at the GCF guidelines, I think I really appreciate the concept, and within our internal discussions, it really triggered also internal discussions what we can do more in urban development, leaving the traditional path. And in this context, we are going to focus especially on new projects concept in the area of urban mobility. I think this is also something in future for Africa. We mostly focus on South Asia and Southeast Asia at the moment. And of course, the issue of urban resilience really becomes the real challenge, I think, for Africa. And when it comes to debt finance in particular. Since we're talking about financial mitigation intermediaries, I think we have to talk a little bit about the national development banks or other financial intermediaries. I think they, for us as a bilateral bank, I think they must play a bigger role and in future. But if I compare our portfolio between the regions, for example, in Latin America, we have a huge portfolio with development bank, with national development banks, regional development banks in the urban sector. We have housing programs, we have transit-oriented development programs. We have now a program on the renewal of commercial vehicle fleets and so on, buses. But there, the financial sector is far further developed. And I think this is not only an issue for climate finance, but for development finance in general. I think we have, as a development bank, as an international development bank, bilateral, we have to focus and to support more the development banks on the national or the regional level. They know the markets, They know the political environment. They can combine different resources for climate finance, including funds from the private sector, and they can reach also smaller investments. I think this was also discussed. I think for us as a bilateral development bank, we need a certain size for investments, but there are plenty of smaller investments out there.
Helmut,
You
if
want
you
to
can
stop
start
me?
wrapping up. Yes, thank you.
Okay. I think from our side, we have a wide range of instruments what we can provide. We have, since we work on the government, we have grant funding through our government. We can do equity in investment vehicles. We can provide TA and also facilities to prepare projects. I think that's very briefly from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Helmut. I'll now give the floor to Emily.
Thank you very much, Juliana, and thank you very much all panelists for this great session. It really demonstrated the importance of working on financial intermediaries, in particular to, as AFD and KfW said, work on the issue of guarantees on lending and in order to allow to lend in local currency, for instance, and because local financial intermediaries such as banks know better the market and the projects. And I also heard the pledge from FDB to enhance the cooperation with the GCF regarding the time and the size of the projects to have a more facilitated cooperation. So we all appreciated the value added of sharing all your experiences today and all your expertise to connect the dots in order to scale up climate finance for urban resilience in Africa. And now I would like to give the floor to the Minister Governor of Abidjan, who will share with us his views and recommendations after this very rich session. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear representatives, dear partners, I would like first and foremost to thank you again as a Minister Governor of the city of Abidjan in my quality of a co-president of the World Fund for the Development of Cities. Thank you very much for the organization of this event organized by the Global Fund for Cities Development. I want to thank you for the quality of your interventions and for the quality of the exchanges that we heard. Altogether, we have explored how we can accompany a climatic transition in cities and territories in Africa. The strategic role of the cities to put in place and implement the global sustainable development agendas is very well recognized. We think that 60% of the SDGs cannot be reached completely without the participation of cities. You know that human growth in Africa is the largest we have seen in the history of humanity. In 5 years, the African continent will have 100 cities of more than 1 million inhabitants in 2030, with 760 million people living in cities. The urban population in Africa will be higher than the total population of Europe. In 2050, half of the population that lives in cities will reach 2 billion citizens. This exponential growth and the vulnerability of our territories facing climatic change make it very urgent to finance the climatic transition locally. And also it makes paramount to take the best choices in terms of sustainability. And the challenges are absolutely colossal. We are talking about $10 billion that were mobilized in investments in sustainable urban infrastructures in the world from now until 2030. In our continent, the majority of the infrastructures that will be built from now until 2050 have to do with secondary cities and cities that still don't exist nowadays at a global scale. So that's why it is indispensable that the African New Deal, called upon by different stakeholders in Africa. We hope that this new African deal is efficient because we need to face our common challenges. We need to intensify our exchanges. We need to intensify the development of solutions to develop the access to the financing for the cities. So in the name of all my African colleagues, I thank the Green Climate Fund for the adoption of a strategy on a climatic transition for the cities. It's a very clear and very strong signal for all the cities. And I salute and thank all the speakers for your experiences and recommendations on how to improve the policies and the tools in order to improve the access of cities to climate funding, in order to have a development of the different portfolio related to urban resilience, and to have much better investments and much better cooperation between public and private funds, allowing regional and national and local investment processes, and reinforcing the role of the public intermediaries. So we, the local representatives, we are going to do our best in order to create the necessary conditions in order to access these financial resources. We're going to work actively in order to find the best solutions available for the cities and territories in order to contribute to reinforcing the role of cities. In terms of my country, Côte d'Ivoire, the large urban areas, such as the Abidjan main district, we are just facing important challenges in terms of climate mitigation and resilience. So that's why we have engaged actions in the different sectors, such as the non-polluting transport modes, putting in place projects also to measure the quality of our air also, and the promotion of circular economy through the creation of the Circular Economy Institution, and also working on the preservation of urban forests and green areas. All these initiatives belong to our priority projects portfolio in order to fight climate change. We all know the difficulties that the investors are confronted to whenever they want to finance local municipalities in Africa, due to the lack of expertise, to the lack of bankable and viable projects, a lack of solvability, and maybe a lack of investment programs in order to access these funding proposals. So that's why we're just working in order to prepare the cities to access financing. So what we are doing with the Global Fund for Cities Development is a very strong partnership. Ladies and gentlemen, I propose that Côte d'Ivoire can play a fundamental role in Africa and in the world, in particular through two very concrete proposals. The first proposal, I have to say, is the organization of the first summit for investment and cities climate transition infrastructures in the first 3 months of 2022 in Abidjan, in Côte d'Ivoire, in order to gather all the national authorities throughout the world, all the public and private investors, all the different financial institutions, and all the different stakeholders in order to engage in a constructive dialogue in order to define the actions that we need to carry out. And this will allow us to have very high-level strategic dialogues and connect the financial offer to the proposal of projects carried out by local authorities on climate transition projects. And the second proposal I have is to launch a national financing program, a funding program for the climatic transition for the territories in Côte d'Ivoire. It's a program that will allow our national and local authorities, and especially our autonomous district that was newly created in Côte d'Ivoire, to really prepare the conditions for the investment for climate transition through training seminars, consolidating the public structures and helping in the elaboration of projects and finding funding also for these projects and improving the dialogue between the project holders with the potential investors and funding agents. We hope that you will help us to put in place these two proposals. And I invite all the different partners present today to mobilize in order to accompany us. These are the two proposals in the name of Mr. the President of our Republic, the head of our government, in order to communicate more in detail about these two initiatives. And you will receive more information about this in the future. Thank you so much for the quality of the exchanges that we heard, and I really congratulate you for the very high quality. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Minister Governance, Mr. Begré Robert Mombe. Thank you so much, because you are our co-president in the Global Fund for Cities and for Cities Development, FMDV.
For the wrap-up and conclusion. Thank you very much, Drazen.
Thank you very much. It is a very impressive webinar, I think. A lot of ideas. Let's look critically at what we have achieved. Many of these issues are really deja vu issues a little bit, because we have been touching upon them for quite some time. The one thing that we didn't touch upon today was that although we are saying that cities and urban sector in Africa have significant priority in investments, the NDCs of these countries do not reflect necessarily, the priority investment required for the urban sector. So there is a discrepancy between what stakeholders are suggesting regarding urban sector in Africa and what the NDCs are saying. This is all related to how effectively Paris alignment is really done. And I would urge all parties and all urban and national stakeholders to continue refining the NDC, national determined contributions, to really prioritize urban investment. Second point is that we clearly do not distinguish very well, what are the development versus climate change priorities. They are similar, not always the same. Obviously, development banks and development partners have a stronger development interest in developing urban infrastructure to feed the economic and social environmental needs of the population. Climate change has to come on top of this. And the best way to do this would be to combine interventions that are partially developmental, partially climate. For instance, our colleague in Rwanda is suggesting that affordable housing is a part of green cities. Well, affordable housing on its own, it's really a developmental initiative. It is when you develop green buildings and passive design constructions with energy efficiency solutions and smart city solutions that you really add the climate component to development solution. So we need to kind of understand these taxonomies and really combine these inputs together. Third issue that I want to raise is that, again, it's deja vu. I mean, we are talking about project preparation in the urban context in Africa for many, many years. I find it a little bit surprising that many parties still cannot combine a map of suggesting, okay, who are the funding agencies that support project preparation and how African cities can prioritize and sequence specific interventions for development and climate impact that can really make a difference. And so I would really urge parties, I would urge FMDV to even organize a webinar and to say, okay, what is the map of multilateral, bilateral donors who are engaging in project preparation so that the quality of project preparation and pipeline is finally not a challenge anymore. I mean, this is a European Commission, French government, German government, right? Multilateral institutions, African Commission. I mean, there are plenty of sources, and these sources should be available to African stakeholders in urban sector to really look into, okay, how to prioritize, sequence proper projects. And we constantly go around this issue, but this issue has been, it's not unknown. It just has to be prioritized. And finally, this is just the beginning of a strong partnership platform through FMDV, which we welcome. Of course, FMDV has significant convening power and institutional strength all over the world, but especially in Africa. So the question is, okay, what is now the next step? How we can best leverage this platform to continue brushing up, calibrating project pipeline in urban Africa, and really come up to the best projects and to best possible partnership sharing and partnership leveraging as a result of this cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Drazen. And now I would leave the floor to Jean-François Abot, FMDV Executive Director, for the final conclusion. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Emily, and thanks a lot, Drazen, also for these concluding words. I would like to thank all the participants for their contribution. I think, like Drazen was saying, the discussion was very rich. We see bridges that can be built between the different initiatives and partners. And I guess on the way forward, the governor minister of Abidjan really made a good announcement to host this first international conferences on financing and investing in climate resilient cities. I think it's the first event of this kind, and that will be the next steps to gather all these institutions, DFIs, private investors, but also national and local governments and their networks, in order to see how to deep dive into concrete action and going from the policies to what is possible to do, and then to connect the needs with the solution that exists. So I think we have a good and clear roadmap. I hope that we will be able to continue and to count on the DFIs and the financial partners here to continue this dynamic, and then to have this perspective of the first investment forum in Abidjan next year. And also I take the point of the governor of Abidjan to engage national program, because I think this is also a key approach that is proposing and going beyond the individual project support, and trying to see how to develop and organize the condition to better finance local development through a more systemic and integrated approach, but also to aggregate the different projects within one country to cities. So I guess very productive. I would like again to thank all of you for your contribution. The video of this webinar, but also the video of the executive director of the GCF will be put online, and you can find it this afternoon on fmdv.net. We will send you the link, and then we will see with GCF, then they can also put this on the GCF website. So you will receive also the different information requested from the PowerPoint presentation. So let's continue to work together, to exchange, and until the next time, I would like to say. Thanks again, and have a good day. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thanks to all the FMDV team also. Juliana and Libertad, Sandra, Justine, and all the others that worked on that, and Emily, of course. Have a good day. Bye-bye.